And it wasn't how I was. And that's the other thing I think people should understand here is that I had a point where I had to make a change. Well, actually, you know what? Let's be clear. I didn't have to make a change. I made a choice.
Hey guys, I'm Dr. Alok Trivedi, aka Dr. Rewire. You're here on the Rewire Your Life podcast. Today's guest is a special human being who I've had a chance to get to know here recently, but he's someone from my favorite country in the world, from the country of England, and he lives just outside of London, and he's an entrepreneur, and he's built a massive business and sold over 22 businesses equaling over $5 billion in sales. He currently runs the Scale Your Business Academy, and he's changing entrepreneurs' lives with what he does. And I want to welcome Nick Bradley to the show. Nick, are you there?
I'm here. It is an absolute pleasure, sir. Thank you for having me.
Hey, man, thanks for being here. I totally appreciate it. What time is it in London right now?
Oh, it's afternoon. I've just had a coffee. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So you've got me pepped up, man. I'm going to bring everything.
I love it. So let's dive right into this, right? So let's go into this. You sold 22 businesses for $5 billion. What kind of businesses did you start? Because I think this is something that our audience really is challenged with. Like, people love to sit and say, I love doing business. I want to build business. Okay, great. But how do people select what kind of business they want to do, and what do they want to scale? How does someone do that? How did you do it?
Yeah. Well, the numbers change all the time. It's actually 26 now. So there you go.
Oh, is it? Okay, well, there you go. 26.
No, not to correct you. It's just in my world, I'm involved in a very specific part, right? I'm involved in what we call scale to sale. So scale up to exit. And for me, there's a long history as to why I do that. I spent years in private equity doing turnaround scale ups. Lots and lots of acquisitions. I've done 117, I think, at last count. Wow. Like crazy numbers. But for me, a lot of people forget the reason they start a business, right? And when they're going through the sort of transition from startup to scale up, they lose their way a lot of the time. And I get involved with businesses that need to get back on track and get the clarity. And quite often it's about building wealth, but at the other side of wealth is time and money freedom. And so the reason I focus on the exit is because, you can create what we call a capital event where literally you reach financial freedom once, right? What you do after that is whatever you choose. So for me, that's where I play, and I get a lot of enjoyment out of helping entrepreneurs and business owners achieve that ambition.
When you started your journey at now 26 businesses inside of this, was there a specific market that you said, hey, I want to go into this market specifically, or did you say any business or whatsoever that can make money? How did you come to that path yourself?
So my history, I started my first business when I was 18. This is back, I look old, right, as you're looking at me here. But
that was probably like 5 years ago for you, it looks like, right?
No, not quite. No. Try a lot longer. Well, I started my first business in the late 80s in Australia. So I originally grew up in Australia and sold that business 3 years later in the early 90s for 3,000 Australian dollars, which is like maybe a Starbucks coffee. It's not a lot of money. So that wasn't the most successful venture, but I kind of got the understanding of starting and then selling. Then I went into the world of corporate and worked with some big companies like News International with Rupert Murdoch and all that for a number of years. And then a big business in the US called Getty Images. So I was in the media game for a long time. But what happened is I got involved in private equity. And for people who don't understand that yet or haven't really explored that yet, it's where you get people putting private investment. So that can come from high net worth individuals. It can come from pension funds and things like that, endowments. And they're given to a firm, effectively an investment banking firm. And that investment banking firm goes out and buys businesses. Yeah. So I was involved in that world. So when I say 26 exits, a lot of those were acquisitions that we made that we then scaled up and sold for 3 or 4 times what we paid. So that was it. So to answer your question, wasn't really a sector. I mean, I've worked across all sectors, done a lot in media, as I said, quite a bit in education these days. That's a very hot sector, quite a lot in e-commerce. But for me, it's the business practices and fundamentals that don't change that much. And what I bring to any business I get involved in now is that understanding of how to scale fast. And as I say, exit rich, because ultimately a lot of people, that's what their ultimate game is.
I'd love to know when your experience in the private equity game, let's maybe talk into the tech sector, because it's so hot right now, right? I've talked to people where tech sector is moving at they're selling at 10 to 15 times its valuation.
That's correct.
Crazy. It's kind of wild. And personally, I want to know more about this sector, to be honest with you. So I'm going to ask you more questions about it.
You can ask away.
So when people are looking at the tech sector and they're building a business, what's quick exit in your experience?
You can, it depends on what you're doing. The last exit I was involved in, the last big exit was 2017. That was a business that was in the education technology sector. It was 14 acquisitions, and we sold that for $2.3 billion, which was a 14 times multiple. So it's kind of right in your numbers, actually. The dynamics of that, that's the thing you've got to think about when you sell a business is it's going to be based a lot on the financial performance, but it's also going to be based on who the acquirer is and what they are looking to achieve. So let's say, for example, you've built a product, particularly in the tech space, that has taken a lot of capital to build, or it's unique, remarkable, whatever that is. There are going to be people out there, bigger businesses, and they might even be backed by private equity or whatever else. And all they're thinking about is how quickly can I buy a product like what you've created, integrate that into my bigger customer base, maybe my bigger geographic coverage, and how can I then maximize that value quicker and faster than what you can. So the reason why you see these big multiples is because there's a lot of capital around right now, and it's much quicker to grow through acquisition than it is one customer at a time.
100%.
And so, you can start something and sell it within 3 years if you want to. I mean, that's the sort of the general runway, but I say there's no reason why you can't exit within a 3 to 5 year horizon if that's what you choose to do.
See, I think that's so important because so many entrepreneurs get into this idea that, and it's almost like this, and I'm guilty of preaching this as well at some level. Do what you love, and I agree with that. I do. You got to love what you do for sure. But the business side of it is that you also have to be able to build a business around it, build customer acquisition, all that comes along with it. But then to be able to look at it from the side of exiting it, because everything that has to have a business has to have a birth and a death, and you got to look at it from that side, right? It's got to have a birth and a death, right? And what is your take on that? Let me hear. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You had a big smirk on that, so I'm curious.
Well, people ask me about. Some people kind of don't quite get the concept of an exit, which sounds a bit odd when I explain it, because I say there's really 4 exits, right? There's the exit that you leave the business and you bring someone in to manage it. Okay, so you go off and live on a beach or whatever you want to do. The cash flow's coming in, the dividends are coming in. You're just not the person that's running that business day to day. So you've exited yourself, okay? But you still own the business. Then you've got the exit, which I talk about, which is the capital event exit. So that's where you're building equity or asset value, and you're trying to sell that business for a lump sum, okay? And that's where, that's the stuff that's really exciting, because that's where someone can have a 7-figure business, they scale to 8 figures, and then they sell that for 8 figures. And one day they look in their bank account and they've got, $20 or $30 million in there, right?
It's not
amazing.
A bad day. Not a bad day.
Not a bad day, right? And some people look at me and go, is that possible? Yes, it is possible. It's absolutely possible. In fact, it's much easier than you think when you break it down, okay? Yeah. And then the other 2 exits, the reason I was laughing is one exit is when you have to close the business down.
For sure.
And this is happening all the time at the moment. There's something like 1,600 businesses per day closing down in North America because people are retiring. Right. And probably it's a profitable
game. Is crazy, right?
Oh, it's the transition of the baby boomer thing coming through. And I think it's year 2030 is when all baby boomers from sort of born after the Second World War are going to reach a retirement age, 65. So that wealth transition is huge, right?
I read something yesterday, just $31 trillion is going to be the wealth transfer.
That's crazy. And we can talk about health as well and what impact that's going to have on health, because you've got these people retiring, leaving their good, profitable businesses, and in many cases closing them down. It's mental. Yeah. And then they're going off to obviously have, end of sort of latter stage life enjoyment, right? So again, if you're an investor and you're thinking about where do you put your money, just look at the way wealth transitions and you can start to get some good indications from that.
For sure. And what was the fourth exit?
Death.
Well, there you go.
I had to leave with that. That's why I was laughing. I was thinking, because some business owners go, I'm never going to exit my business. And I go, do you know what? You are. Yeah. Don't want to be the person to break that. You're going to do it. May not be how you want to, but trust me, it's going to happen. It happens to us all, as they say.
There's a 5th one that I'd like to push back with. And the 5th one that people don't like to talk about, or they don't talk about often, is an ESOP, right?
Oh yeah, so you can sell. I didn't get into the ways you can exit your business. You can sell your business to your staff. Yeah, absolutely. Management buyouts, management buy-ins. there's effectively a few ways of selling a business if we get into that lane, right? You've got
Sure,
that.
let's go there. Let's go there. Let's go to that discussion. I think it'd be great.
Yeah, so ESOPs are great. ESOPs are great because also you are sharing the value and you're changing the mindset of your employees to be owners. Okay, so I love all that. I also think it's a really good demonstration of loyalty and things like that back to your teams, because people are kind of incentivized to be part of the strategy, not just the day-to-day, right? So ESOPs, for people who don't know exactly what that is, that's where you're effectively creating a share or an option scheme that the staff in your business can participate in. So they actually have a piece of the business. They get to own a piece of the business, okay?
Right.
So you've got that. And then you've got sort of the more traditional kind of exits. So I talked about management buyout, management buy-in, different definitions of this, but that might be where you sell the business to a cohort of leadership and they then raise funds. They can go externally to raise the funds, or they pay for the business from the profits of the business over time. But effectively, you're selling the business to them. There are some good tax advantages for that in different parts of the world as well. Then you've got the more traditional exits. So you've got the ones that I've been more involved in, which is private equity. There's two types of private equity. There's the private equity where they come and buy you if you're big enough already and you become what is called a portfolio company. That means that you're the beachhead, if you like, of where they're going to do lots more acquisitions around you. Okay. Mm-hmm. Or you are a corporate, if you like, that's PE backed, which means, you're already that portfolio company and you're now on the hunt to go and buy other businesses. Right. So that sits in private equity. Then you've got corporate. So large corporate comes and acquires. And then you've got effectively an IPO where you're selling the business on the open market. It's not really technically an exit, though. People think it's an exit because you can take some money off the table, but it's really a raising capital game. But people get excited by all the stuff you read in the press about this unicorn $1 billion business IPO, and I often sort of go in there and say, listen, I don't want to dampen your parade, mate, but just sell the business to private equity or a corporate, take a hell of a lot of money out, and then go and do something else.
That's it. I love that, right? And I love the way you're talking about it because it's so true, right? Like, people are looking at business and they have to look at the exit strategy, because if you don't, you're going to end up dying. Your business is going to run your life, right? And that's a key thing that people don't realize, is that once you get into business, you build it big enough, eventually that calendar is going to take over your life. And that calendar is going to take over your life, and then you're going to start resenting the business if you don't structure it, organize it, so that you can actually breathe and take care of your health and do the things that you want to be able to do. But you're going to have to look at a way to exit out, because if you don't, it's going to force you to destroy yourself. Like, that's the thing about business people don't realize. People go through burnout phases and they feel exhausted because they don't know how to manage the internal spectrum of the business, at least in my opinion. I'd love to hear your take on it. And what it does is it destroys their health.
You're spot on. I often say you can only scale a business to the level of your identity. Excuse me.
100% true. I love that. Yeah.
And we can define identity in different ways, actually. So there's a little bit about, who you think you are now to who you're becoming. But I actually think your physicality, certainly your emotional state, your mental state, to some extent your spiritual state, all of those different areas come together within that one thing. So as you evolve and change all of those different areas, that allows you to create something more transformational.
It's true, right? And I like to say that you can't exceed the consciousness of the leader. The consciousness of the leader is most important, and that leader has to make sure that they're focusing on their consciousness. And that's why, for those of you who are watching this podcast, followed my stuff in the past, it's all about rewiring it, because how you rewire the nervous system is it allows you to think at a grander scale. And that's why you get around people like Nick, and you get around people that are thinking at a higher level. You're going to have an emotional feedback, and an emotional feedback is there to help you respond and expand yourself. Right. So currently, when you look at yourself, and Nick, I'm sure that you can attest to this as well, when you've worked with business owners and leaders, what's the biggest thing that stops people from selling? What do you think?
In terms of getting to that place, or just the idea behind what they would need to do?
Well, maybe both. Maybe it's a good distinction. What about both?
I don't want to simplify it because I don't think it's as simple as this, but I often will say it comes down to how they think and how they feel. So it is the mindset piece more than anything else. It's the interpretation of what they think they are capable of, right? And the reason I can also talk about this is I went through my own journey of this, where I had to break out of the prism that sits within private equity and investment banking, and I had to think differently. And the only way I could do that was to adjust anything that was programmed into me for years.
Yeah.
And that was in itself a challenge, because I was so indoctrinated in a certain way of doing things in a certain process. So if you take that into let's say the average business owner, and I don't mean business owners are average because they're not, they're exceptional, but
Yeah.
the
No, I
person
get
out
it.
there who is what you said, right? They're stuck. And sometimes they're stuck for years in this treadmill, right?
Yes.
And they think the problem's the business, or they think the problem's the market or customers or all these external factors. And what they've got to realize is they've got to work on themselves first, right? They've got to start there.
Yeah.
And that is about putting themselves in different rooms, different environments, hanging out with different people, being challenged as well as being supported. Maybe it is about looking after their physicality first. I'm a big believer that the one thing you can control when you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed, burnout is you can control what you put in your mouth, what you drink, exercise, getting out, going for a walk, right? You can control that. You can say, oh, I haven't got time, but that's not true, right?
That's not
And
true.
as soon as you start to build that internal empire from that, then other things start to come from it. So
There's
I'm a
no
huge
question about
believer
that.
in that. Yeah, go for it.
I agree with that 100%. I was reading just an article yesterday that cortisol in itself, cortisol affects the way that we think. And most business owners, 72% of business owners today deal with some sort of mental health disorder. And they call it anxiety, they call it stress, they call it frustration, depression, all these different factors. 72%. The national average in America is 42%. But
Oh,
entrepreneurs are a
crazy.
unique group because we hold on to the stresses of life. And we don't call it stress. We don't call it we're burnt out. What we say, because we have to work harder, we have to grind it out harder, we're different, we're leaders in that. And what we do is we destroy ourselves because of that. So it's a fact.
Wow.
Right?
Didn't know those sort of numbers. I mean, I had my own burnout 4 or 5 years ago when there's a few kids screaming in the background. Apologies for that.
Okay.
Where actually I was getting so stressed, if you like, with what I was doing in the private equity game, big numbers, like some of those exits we spoke about.
Yeah.
I had a physical manifestation. I went to bed one night and I cracked all the teeth here on the right side of my jaw,
Oh,
like
wow.
2 teeth.
Yeah.
And you know, it was funny. I had other things going on too, right? And it was because I was repressing the stuff that was going on, and then eventually it caught up with me physically. So, be curious on your thoughts on that too. Do you see that?
All the time, man. I can tell you, like, really what it comes down to in my world, it's a mind body game, right? Like that's really what my mastery is, and is in understanding the mind body connection. And
Great.
this is stress, cortisol, cracking your teeth, you're grinding at night, and usually that leads to this from stress or some resentment inside of your businesses. Now, we deal with these emotions. I always say there's 5 primary emotions, and that's infatuation, resentment, guilt, shame, and pride. And these 5 primary emotions we run through our system all day long, and we're always triggered by these things. So for you, for example, it's an emotional game. Exercise is important, get your body moving, but it's managing the emotions. Emotions are the most important factors for a leader to be able to manage and lead. Like I had a chance to meet John Maxwell the other day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, great guy, great human being. Just loved having a conversation with him. Just a tremendous human being. And I loved what he had to say. It was the idea that you got to provide more value to people, and you continue to provide more value to people, and you detach yourself from emotion. If I really had to say that at the end of the day, that's what it came down to. And so for your leaders and who you're coaching through, I would bet, right? I bet there's a different level of stress for someone who's in their first exit versus their 5th exit.
Oh, gotcha. But again, I think one of the things I've found, which is interesting, is once someone ticks the box of financial freedom for the first time, right? Like, that the idea that you don't have to work for money anymore, right? That's taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
It changes the way they approach things.
For sure. For sure. Money brings on survival. I like to say that when you have to do something or you need to do something, you're stuck in that paradigm of survival. As soon as you get the financial game taken care of, and the quicker you do that, the quicker you take care of the financial game of your life, the easier you can do the things that you love to do, right? In your world, you've exited 26 businesses now. And so finance isn't a factor anymore. You've done it time and time again. You're not stressed out about it. You're like, yeah, it's no big deal. But the first time you did it, it was probably like, man, if you don't, then what's next? Anytime we think in a desperate state, our neurology leads to cortisol, leads to stress, leads to destruction of our own internal physiology. But when you get to do what it is you love to do, you instantaneously, it's the most secret thing to mental longevity that nobody talks about, is that it increases your lifespan doing the things that you love to do on a day-to-day basis.
How do you manage that in terms of, I mean, it's interesting this, because I find a lot of business owners as well, they like the grit and they like the badge of honor of kind of like, relentless hours. But is the concept of slowing down to speed up, for example, that's an overused saying maybe, but do you find that to be true? There's better performance when people have different habits.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And it's not habits. Habits is kind of like the last thing on the paradigm, the way that
Yeah.
I see it, at least. And the way that that I've seen the neurology work, it's really about figuring out how your brain is working and doing what it is that you value the most. Right? I love
Cool.
teaching. That's the thing I love to do the most. I love taking someone and helping rewire them. I have other businesses, other business ventures going for private equity, for sales, all these different things inside that. But I'm not going to stop teaching because that's who I am. I'm a teacher by design. Now you can have businesses under that. So that's why when you made the statement earlier, is that your identity is the key, right? And my identity as a teacher, and your identity as a business owner and teacher as well. I would have to say,
Well, very similar to you.
teacher.
Very similar to you. Teaching is probably my highest value.
I would agree. Listening to you speak right now and watching your profile and some of your videos and that, I would guarantee that. So as you're teaching, that's what you love to do, but you have all these other business ventures inside of that.
Yeah.
So no one has to get you up in the morning to say, oh, you know what, you have to go teach. No, you love to do it, and that you're going to continue doing it. And so the more people can get into that state of doing what it is they love to do and delegate everything else off of their plate, they're not stuck in a desperate state. And the less desperation someone's in, the greater influence they'll be able to create. Because stress and performance are actually inversely related. They're inversely related. The more stressed you are, the lower you perform. The less stressed you are, the higher you perform. So that's why the saying comes along, at least the way I see it, is that you slow down to speed up. And in your world, right, I bet you like one of the things that you probably tell people is, and I would guess, I don't know this for a fact, but take a vacation, right? Take a vacation, take a break.
I often say to business owners who are right in the sort of bottleneck stage, go away for 3 months. I actually say it like this: go and fire yourself.
Yeah.
Because you learn a lot from firing yourself. And you see the reaction, particularly the ones who like to have control, the ones who are still in the psychology of startup, where they are the people, right? When you see that transition happen, it's amazing, right? And then they realize, wow. But then some of them, and this is interesting, I'd be curious on your thoughts on this. Some of them, yeah, they realize they're not in the business, or their business doesn't need them, and then they get super bored, and some of them get depressed.
Yeah. Because their identity is built up in being needed.
Yes, precisely. Exactly. And then they have to, really create a new identity, because it's quite painful with the fact that, this baby that they've given birth to doesn't need them anymore.
That's right. And then what happens though, is that they get depressed, and then they lose their own self-value, and they've made millions of dollars doing this, right? They made lots and lots of money in doing this, but their own self-value then gets depreciated. But here's the kicker that happens, at least what I've seen, is they'll lose all that money. They'll call it sabotage. They'll lose the money in order to create a new way for them to get value back in their life.
Yeah. Well, you see that in other areas too, don't you, as well? Because,
100%.
But why is that sabotage conscious?
It's unconscious, but it's not sabotage. It's actually an identity survival mechanism.
Like
because
that, like that concept of the concept of the thermostat that people talk about, that, once it starts to feel uncomfortable, you go back to where you feel comfortable.
You do, but your neurology has a frequency that it actually comes back to where it's comfortable, and that neurology stays stuck inside that. So you'll never, that's why people write big goals. And I don't know what you necessarily preach, but I don't tell people to set big goals, right? Because it's not about setting big goals. It's about creating day-to-day action that compounds daily. Daily compounding is far more powerful than one big goal.
I talk about it like this. I talk about having a vision, which is, I have a 20-year vision, right? It goes a long way out. And some people kind of get overwhelmed by the concept of that. But for me, it's more really just the direction of travel, right? As opposed to all these things written down, like 75 different goals. But I know what I want my life to be like. Well, at this stage, I feel I know what I want my life to be like. So therefore, it's an intention to move towards that. And then I just focus on the stuff I do daily, weekly, and I get the maximum I go out. And I advise this to people too, is about 90 days.
Yeah, that's right. Every entrepreneur that I've talked to, everyone says set these big goals that are gigantic and set them so far it's got to scare the crap out of you. If it scares you, you're not going to do it. Like, that's just reality. The more you're scared of something, you're not going to do it. It's not like it's uncomfortable. Like, you've got to work yourself up to it. No, go 90 days and take it in 90-day sprints. That's the secret. Yeah. And every successful entrepreneur, every private equity person I've talked to, they said, think about 90 days, then the next 90 days. And then here's the key thing that they've taught me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. They said, plan it for 3 years, because you don't know what's going to happen 3 years from now.
Oh yeah. We only work in a 3 year. So if we're working on the business side of things, the 20-year vision is a personal thing, right?
Yeah.
But in a business, I actually advise people to think about their exit in 3 years, regardless of where their starting point is.
I love that.
And yeah, it's interesting what it does, right? So, and this is what I caveat by saying, listen, if you work back with the end in mind, right, and you're clear on what that looks like, even if you get to that point and you decide that you don't want to exit, you've still built a stunning business.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no downside to this.
So when people want to sell, what does a private equity company look for?
There's a number of different, what I'd call tactical things, right? But it's important to understand where value comes from, because there are thresholds of size and scale, which are important. But then there are a few other kind of what I call nuances or very specific things that will start to increase, and to use your word, compound, right? So ultimately, the value from a private equity standpoint still sits in the numbers. So it's the profit and loss and it's the balance sheet. And I often say 70% of the value is going to sit on having good numbers, right? And that's things like high margins, having low churn rates of customers, not being reliant on any one customer or client, having diversification. Geographic reach is also quite interesting. That does increase multiples as well. So you've got all that comes together. Then you get into the really interesting stuff. So is there a product or service which is unique, remarkable, proprietary? How hard is it to replicate? Like the example we spoke about at the beginning. Then you're starting to look at the customer base to see how strong the brand has been created with an identified niche. And then the last thing you're looking at is the quality of the people, the structure of how you've built the company, right? Making sure there's clear delineation between who does what and why, the values driving behaviors, which underpin the culture. And then the thing that often gets missed, but is so important, is the way that processes and systems drive levels of automation, which then obviously have an impact back on the financials. So those are the things that as a guy like me going in, either doing turnaround or scale up, I'm looking at the business through those lenses. And when they all come together, it's not that 1 + 1 = 2. You get the 1 + 1 = 11. You get the compound. And that's where you get to the big exits, like the 14 times I mentioned previously.
So we said $31 trillion is going to be transferred over the course of the next 10, 12 years here. Where are people finding these businesses? If you're selling bigger things, what if someone's on here and they're saying, you know what, I don't want to buy a big business, but where are people finding, where do you suggest people go find businesses to buy and acquire?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be clear, I buy small businesses, but I put them together to create a bigger business. So when I go and do my personal investment, I'm looking at businesses that are doing usually somewhere between $1 and $12 million in revenue, right? One being the absolute minimum. Because if you think about it, there's a point where once a business gets too big, you're competing with the private equity firms. So if you wanted to go and acquire businesses, you don't want to be going after with them, because they're going to be deploying a lot of capital. The valuations are going to be higher. So if you want to go and buy a business that's doing let's say under 10 million in revenue, so it's going to be doing, let's say, somewhere between 1.5 to 3 million in net profit. Okay, so that's still a reasonable sized business, but not crazy. If you're a 7-figure business owner and you want to scale via acquisitions, that would be a nice place to look. First place I send people, is a bit of fun, is a website in the US called bizbuysell.com.
I've seen it, actually. I've perused through it myself. Yeah.
Well, it's like shopping. I say to people as a joke, I say, go shopping. Do you like shopping? Do you like buying cars? Do you like buying watches? Go shopping for a business, right? Yeah. And what's cool about that website is, there's lots of businesses on there. The second thing is, if you go into the detail, it tells you the reason why the owner is leaving, and more often than not, it's retirement. And then the last thing, which is really cool, is there's a concept in M&A called leverage, where you're leveraging the business to do the acquisition, effectively paying for the business. It's called deferred payments, or sometimes called seller financing. Right. And you can search biz buy sell via seller financing. So that effectively means if you buy a small business, you pay for that business over time from the profits of the business. Okay, now just think about that for a second.
Yep.
Right. So, you're not taking out of your money, out of your pocket. You're taking it from the business that you're about to acquire to pay back the seller.
That's right.
And you may ask the question, why would someone do that? Well, they'll do that if they're sick, or they don't want to be in the business anymore. They want to spend time with their family. Being in the business is more painful than the details of how they're going to sell it. That's the way. So there's so many businesses out there like that. It's crazy.
I love that. When you look at, as we're kind of wrapping up, because I could sit and talk to you about this for days. I'm telling you, I could, because this is where I'm at in my journey in business and learning about private equity and taking the next step. So I could pick your brain for days on this stuff. But when you look at it and say, okay, you know what, we're doing the private equity game. We're playing that, and you're teaching. You've got this killer podcast that's like #1 on iTunes. You're doing all this. What gets you up in the morning now and continue to do what you do and make the impact in the world after you keep doing all this business these transactions? And it's easy for you now at some level.
Well, I think it comes down to a few things. As I mentioned before, I went through my own transition, right, where I was making a lot of money in private equity, but I didn't have any fulfillment. And so I needed to change that. So I decided to quit that world and jump on the side of the business owner, the entrepreneur. And that for me is where a lot of the value is created, but not where a lot of the value is realized. So my whole thing was, how can I create freedom from entrepreneurship, true freedom? Again, looking firstly at that first time where, you can build something so valuable that sells, and then you don't have to worry about money again. You actually achieve time and money freedom. My experience of that is that a lot of people then go on to do greater things, and some of those things are philanthropic. So what gets me out of bed in the morning is the ability to teach, coach, mentor, advise people to be able to achieve that from the experiences that I've had. And for me, it feels more like a mission than it feels like anything else.
I love that, dude, because that's exactly what I teach people, is that you got to be able to have your mission in place. And you said something earlier that I want to tie everything back together with. You have a 20-year vision, and the way that the brain is set up is that you're functioning from the prefrontal cortex. And the greater you function from the prefrontal cortex, the greater clarity you have, the greater long-term vision you have. And if you're functioning from desperation versus inspiration, you have a short-term vision. That's why you can't see beyond that. So those of you who are listening to this and saying, okay, I like what Nick has to say. I like who he is. I like his whole thing. And he said the key word, his mission, is that he wants to help serve more people, and he has a 20-year vision. So this is a guy who I can tell you is, based on his brain thinking, is functioning, that he gets to live a life, but he loves living his life and doing what he loves to do. That's why he's making impact. So Nick, where can people find you? Where can people get more information? How can they come into your world to be able to serve people and humanity?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for that analysis, because that's really lovely.
And
true, it's how I feel.
That's how it works.
And I wasn't how I was. And that's the other thing I think people should understand here, is that I had a point where I had to make a change. Well, actually, you know what? Let's be clear. I didn't have to make a change. I made a choice, right? Yeah. But that was fearful at the time. I was scared to do it. But once I've done it and leaning into it was really, really powerful. So thank you for that. And I'd love to have you on my show as well, by the way, because I think you could help a lot of my listeners. So we'll tee that up.
For sure. Absolutely.
But in terms of reaching out to me, so my podcast is Scale Up with Nick Bradley. As you mentioned, it was #1 for a number of months, actually, in the UK in the business charts. Started off being called Scale Up Your Business, but now it's Scale Up, because I like to bring really interesting people on who've got different perspectives, not just in the world of business, but this idea of leveling, this idea of, stepping forward into identity and the bits that we've spoken about.
Yeah.
So that's my podcast. I've got a community on Facebook called Build Your Business Empire, again, for people who want to think bigger about business. So that's free to join. And then people can reach out to me on Instagram or LinkedIn. I tend to hang out there the most. It's The Real Nick Bradley, because everyone steals profiles these days. I had to call myself something cheesy like that. True. The Real Nick Bradley. In fact, I'll tell you funny, like I said, well, what am I going to change it to? And then I saw Hugh Jackman was the real Hugh Jackman. He's a fellow Aussie. So I thought I'll do The Real Nick Bradley.
It's good enough, right? If it's good enough for Hugh, it's got to be good enough for me. That's what I would like to say.
You can overthink these things, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So cool. Well, Nick, I appreciate you being on here. For those of you, follow Nick, follow what he's got to say. Like I am super impressed, not by his successes. I'm super impressed with his humility and who he is. I think he's an amazing individual, an amazing human being. In this conversation, I've gotten to really get to connect with him. I really appreciate him. And for those of you who are watching, I appreciate you who are watching, because this is where you get to rewire your life. Live the life that you want to. Living a life of inspiration is a secret to it. Rewiring your life is the path to get there. Just because you've been through a journey in the past, maybe you've had some traumas, maybe you've had some rude experience, maybe something has stopped you from finding out who you are in the path and the journey. But if you see it on the way versus in the way, you'll move towards a level to live the life that you want to. That's the name of the game. So thank you for joining me again at the Rewire Your Life podcast. Till next perfect time. I'll see you then. Thanks a lot. Hey guys, if you like that video, click on the link over here and you're going to love the next video.